Hey guys, what's up? Dr. Feelgood here, also known as Richard, your DM. I'm here today to do something that I thought that I would never be doing, which is make a vlog. Quick note about me, I'm not really equipped for vlogging. I'm using like a crappy like $20 Logitech webcam that I bought like 4 years ago. I'm not really good at just talking for long periods of time. So there's probably going to be a lot of like smash cuts as I sort of rework my thoughts and put everything into a coherent sort of semblance of order. Today is December 30th, 2017. So we're just about to finish out the year and move into 2018. So I thought it would be a good time to sort of reflect on how this adventure has been going for us so far. Um, this adventure has been 3 episodes of our main campaign, along with 3 one-shots, one of which I wrote and DM'd myself, and 2 of which were written and DM'd by one of our other players, Andy. So just so you get a sense of who I am and where my experience is with Dungeons and Dragons, I have a lot of experience with Dungeons and Dragons as a spectator. I've spent more than 150 hours consuming D&D content through the Adventure Zones podcast and the Rooster Teeth shows Twits and Crits and Heroes and Halfwits. Um, I've have about 20 hours of experience as a dungeon master, 5 of which were with a previous group that sort of fell apart on me, and 15 with this current group. Um, and I only have 7 hours of experience as a player, as I just got to play 2 sessions with Andy DMing over the last 2 weeks. So, purpose of this vlog. It's really more about self-tracking and self-reflection. Um, if you're watching this, it's probably because you're one of the 5 players in my group and you're interested in seeing my candid thoughts on how the experience is going. Um, or you're probably me, in which case I'm just talking to myself. And this is something I want to use as a way of tracking my own growth as we continue our adventure together. In the unlikely event that you don't belong to one of those 2 groups, being my players or me, welcome aboard. I don't know how much utility you're going to get out of this, but if you're someone who's looking to get into D&D and you want to sort of see what my experience has been like as someone who's more recently getting into D&D, this might be the thing for you. Otherwise, you might just want to pass it over. Other things I want to discuss in this vlog is just some of the cool moments that have happened over our first 6 game sessions, how the characters are developing in our main campaign, and also the road ahead. What I'm doing with my Twitch channel with this particular campaign, what I'm planning on posting on YouTube, and uh, what comes after this campaign ends. I kind of want to start by talking about how our campaign's going. The campaign we're running is the Horde of the Dragon Queen, which is the first half of the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, which is officially published by Wizards of the Coast. So far in the campaign, we've gone through 2 episodes of the book. So the book is divided into 8 concrete episodes. Um, over our first 3 play sessions, we've completed the first 2, and we've just begun the third. So episode 1 of the campaign book was Green Nest in Flames. It sort of had a theme of just movement from one combat encounter to the next. It was really heavy on combat encounters. And I've found through my experience doing that combat encounters are exciting. They produce some really cool player moments, stuff that ends up on those highlight reels that I've published later on. But it actually, in a way, slows the pace of campaign progression. Fights take a long time to conduct, especially with 5 players and a number of NPCs. And just the number of combat encounters that we included to get through episode 1 of the book really probably introduced a lot more unnecessary fatigue to the party than necessary. It just sort of, slowly chewed up their spell slots and their health points. To the point where they just had less resources going on, and it took a long time to get through. Um, so that being said, the the book gives you a list of encounters you can run, and you can run any or all of them. I ran all of them. Probably a mistake. Shouldn't have done that. I could have dialed it back a little bit and gotten through it faster without really detracting from the experience. An important lesson I learned from this is how you should go about adjusting combat counters for 5 people. Like the book was written with a 4-person party in mind, so I had to scale things up to be good for a 5 person party. And what I did when I was organizing it was a lot of times I just increased numbers. So if there were 6 kobolds in a group, I increased them to 7 or 8. Um, I'm thinking that the thing I should have done instead was upgrading enemies as opposed to increasing their numbers. So use a slightly harder enemy type instead of adding an extra one, because it actually has some really interesting effects on the combat when you just increase numbers. Um, there's a chart in the Dungeon Master's Guide about how increasing enemy numbers sort of has a multiplicative effect as opposed to additive. So in the future, I think when I'm adjusting combat encounters, I think I'm just going to sort of take, something that has a challenge rating of 1/8 and maybe move it up to something of 1/4 for one part of the enemy party instead of just increasing numbers. Once they got through episode 1, they were on to episode 2, which was the bandit camp. So the trip to the bandit camp, their operations within the bandit camp, and then moving back to Green Nest. The theme of this was really a more open world type thing, where the characters kind of had this opportunity to go just wander freely and interact with NPCs as they saw fit. It had a much more stealth and subversion based role playing aspect rather than combat based. Um, so it really created some cool moments from a role playing perspective. But at times it ended up having a lot of characters that ended up far away from the action or not participating for long periods of time. Since it had the stealth aspect, our rogue played a very central role in how conducting how the session went, whereas our fighter and our druid were literally just sitting in a cave at times, just waiting for them to come back. So obviously that wasn't ideal. At all times we want all the players involved in the process, and there shouldn't be a time where it's like more than 10 minutes passes without a character like even being involved with the process. That being said, we had some really strong character development moments that happened during the second episode, during some of the downtime, and I'm going to be pretty excited to talk about that in a little bit. We just kicked off episode 3. It's returning to the bandit camp area, and it's gonna end up turning into a dungeon crawl, pretty much. So that's really 3 distinct different kinds of things that are happening in the first 3 episodes. So I'm excited to see how episode 3 is going to go, so I can figure out how I'm going to conduct those kind of environments in the future. So now I want to sort of get into talking about how some of the character development's going in the campaign. Several of the characters are really starting to find their voice, and their personality is becoming a lot more colorful. For instance, Giovanni's one-on-one defeat with Landragosa at Green Nest is sort of shaping his character in a pretty significant way. Giovanni being a character who prides himself on his dueling ability, to lose one-on-one bothers him a great deal. And it actually shaped his character in such a way that he changed like his primary bond to being upset about that loss at Green Nest, and he's eager to pursue another one-on-one opportunity to fight this half dragon again, to redeem himself. Speaking of Giovanni, there's a really good budding relationship happening between him and Ratziel. Um, Giovanni, being a cartographer, managed to really hit it off with Ratziel, who is interested in sailing, and like sailing and chart making are very closely linked to each other. And it was cool to see this moment where Giovanni decided to spend some of his downtime going off and copying some of his maps with the intent of gifting them to Ratziel of coastal areas. Talia, our druid, is really starting to come into her own as a character as well. Her confusion about how society works and social interaction is evident, like specifically like relating to she doesn't understand how currency works. These are all just shiny coins to her, and she doesn't really understand their value. And I thought it was really interesting how during her downtime she decided to spend her time by finding the nearest grove away from Grove, the nearest wooded area, and making herself comfortable there as opposed to staying in town. Unfortunately, one of the really cool moments that with Talia's character development happened off screen. When Giovanni went off to start copying his charts to gift to Ratziel, Talia gained this concern about how he was mapping potentially sacred forest areas to the point where she was spying on him to make sure that he wasn't mapping anything that would be considered sacred to her. Over our first 3 game sessions, we haven't had that much development come from Lucina or Virtus, but there's definitely more to come on that later. Both the characters have a little bit more guarded personalities and pasts, so they're intentionally withholding some of that information until their characters are a little bit more comfortable with their party members. Now I kind of want to get into how I think some of the one-shots were going. As a whole, I think it went pretty good. I think one of the critical mistakes I made was I sort of put together this intel packet that the players were going to look at during the planning meeting before they actually conducted the heist, and I should have just provided all of that information up front. Like, I had players sitting there reading it for the first time during the role-playing session, which is how I wanted their characters to be reacting, but it led to these moments where it was like, 5 minutes of silence while characters just read stuff, which isn't really great for moving the plot forward. I think I should have provided all that material beforehand and just had the players roleplay as they were reading it for the first time. I think some of the combat encounters didn't go so great, particularly the final boss fight. I didn't balance that properly. It was way too easy. Actually, the whole vault scene as a whole was kind of clunky. I think I need to really streamline that so that moment goes off without a hitch, because it was kind of really disjointed when we were playing it live. All in all, the difficulty was relatively low, but I'm kind of okay with that. Like, I created these 4 characters that were supposed to be these really badass bank robbers who had their craft down to a science, and I wanted it so a really well thought out plan was going to be rewarded with a smooth heist, and that's more or less how it went, with some road bumps that the characters dealt with pretty well. It had a lot of really great personal payoff to me as the author in DM. It was a really exciting thing that when I got to the end of it, that I got to talk to the players afterwards who told me like they had a great time playing it, and like they loved the story, and just that feeling of I created this thing and my friends had a really good time playing it and enjoying it, was really rewarding to me. And I think if you're someone who is interested in being a DM, you will find the same sort of feeling. Next, I kind of want to get into where my head is at when I'm creating game mechanics, specifically talking about my DM style and the homebrewing mechanics that I put into this campaign so far. So right off the bat, like day 0, before the campaign even started, I had to start homebrewing aspects for the campaign, specifically because Lucina's character had a very specific background that didn't really fit with the things that were in the book. So I developed a fully custom background for her. Her character lost her parents early in life. She started committing street crimes to keep herself fed and alive. But there's this really key moment in her life where she goes into this martial arts dojo and is trained there before eventually ending up back on the streets after that phase ended. So that street rat style sort of pulled in elements from the urchin, criminal, and charlatan backgrounds, but there was no real good fit for how I was going to apply the martial arts aspect of her background. So my approach when I was sort of crafting this was looking at how other backgrounds are constructed. And what I found is that backgrounds typically provide 2 skill proficiencies, 1 to 2 additional proficiencies, whether they be tools or languages or what have you, and a modest set of additional starting equipment that matches with that background, along with a feature that is very specific to that kind of character background. So when I was selecting skill proficiencies that accompanied this background, I wanted to pretty much have half of it reflect her street background. That's where her stealth proficiency came from, and the martial arts academy background, and that's where her acrobatics proficiency came from. Her additional proficiencies came in the form of tools, specifically thieves' tools and her dice set. The starting equipment that she had reflected the urchin background pretty closely. It was really just a set of personal effects that she had when she left the dojo. The feature that I included with this background is actually the part that I'm most proud of because I kind of crafted it from ground up. The feature I created for this background is called Acrobatic Martial Artist. Its text reads as follows. Once per combat encounter, you may attempt an acrobatic movement to reposition yourself on an enemy. Upon a successful acrobatics check, you gain advantage on the attack that follows, or gain the ability to disengage as a bonus action on that turn. This really fits with Lucina's character style, which is one that likes to perform flashy maneuvers, especially when she has the upper hand. But moving forward, as the character starts to gain levels, I really need to start auditing this ability because it's going to have weird implications when it's combined with the rogue's cunning action. So I need to see how that balance plays out and be ready to adjust it accordingly. Really, the next aspect of homebrewing that I've thrown into this campaign is how I'm managing Rotsael's critical fails. Rotsael has rolled a number of critical ones to start this campaign off. Typically, critical failures on spellcasting results in the spell blowing up in your own face or accidentally hitting a teammate with it. And honestly, that doesn't sound all that interesting to me. That's kind of run-of-the-mill. So I was inspired to incorporate the Wild Magic Surge table from the Sorcerer class for managing those critical failures. And I think that adds a lot of, fun flavor, and it just makes critical failures a little bit more interesting. And I think that just increases the fun for everyone. While we're on the subject of homebrewing, I kind of just want to talk about how I went about writing that one-shot, The Great Elturel Savings Caper. I just want to sort of go into the fact that it's a lot of work. The playtime was approximately 3.5 hours. I probably spent about 20 to 30 hours prepping that adventure. The way I sort of went about writing it was by creating the characters first, creating 4 characters that were well suited for their roles within a heist team, and then designing challenges that incorporated those skill sets afterwards. I wanted to create a scenario where each character had to use their specialized skills at least once, and that's not really sure if I succeeded in that regard. Um, there was probably a path where you only needed 3 of the characters to complete the heist, so I might need to go back and rework that a bit. But also, while I was authoring this, I took some liberties with how the rules work for the sake of making my story coherent. And that kind of brings me back to a line from the Dungeon Master's Guide that really stuck with me. And that is that the rules exist to serve you, not the other way around. The rules need to be applied consistently to keep things balanced, so you can't just play with the rules willy-nilly and then go back on it for the next adventure, because you need it to work the same way every time. But my personal philosophy on this is that you shouldn't let judicious application of the rules prevent you from telling a good story. If you need to play with the rules a little bit so you can improve the story, that's something you should absolutely do. And you should always keep in mind that the point of Dungeons & Dragons is to create entertainment for yourself and your fellow players. And that means different things depending on who you're playing with. Some players just like combat, combat, combat. They're not having fun unless they're swinging a sword. Other players really like to get into their characters' heads and spend a lot of time talking with NPCs and exploring the world. Through my first couple of experiences of homebrewing, the best advice I can give to a new DM is don't be scared to create your own game mechanics. Even if you're totally new to this, just be prepared to audit them and adjust them as necessary so that it works properly going forward. So over the last 2 weeks, I got to finally experience things from a player's perspective for the first time. We played 2 adventures with Andy DMing them both. They were non-sequential. They were standalone from each other. The first one was called The Tale of a Cat, and the second one was called The Bloodstone Brew. For that first adventure, I developed a first-level Tiefling Ranger with an affinity for alchemy to play through the adventure. And immediately, first impressions as a player is just I was blown away by how well composed the adventure was, and it was a really humbling experience for me as an inspiring adventure author and the person who's been DMing our game sessions to this point. Andy's level of detail that he included while writing his adventure just blew me away. My character had this tendency to wander off and start looking at plants that he might be able to use in his alchemy, and I was expecting this to be something that Andy had to make up as he went along, but he actually had that in the adventure notes already, like a description for every plant that I encountered and the effects it has before I even had to ask about it, which was incredible to me. And immediately the thing that struck me while I was playing that first adventure is the differences in mindset between being a player and being the DM. As a player, you get to really focus on your character on a microscopic level, really digging into their head as you roleplay them to figure out how you want them to be portrayed to the outside world. As a DM, I frequently found that I was missing out on a lot of the micro level stuff because I was just thinking ahead about the macro level things that were coming up. Like one of my characters would start explaining in detail about what their character was doing and why, and I would miss like half of it. I would just get the general idea of it because I was so focused on answering a whisper from another character or setting up the next combat encounter that was just around the corner. I created this first level ranger with the intention that it was just going to be a throwaway thing, that I'd go and play it for a few hours and I would never touch it again. But after completing that first adventure, I had found a real level of excitement playing this character, and I was excited to do it again. That excitement about playing that character again paid off immediately when Vaughn couldn't make the next game session, and Andy again volunteered to DM another adventure that he had wrote himself. What I found through playing these two adventures is that Andy has this really specific formula in mind, at least he did for these two adventures. That formula included a lot of verbal and puzzle components up front, where players were just sort of moving around the world and interacting with it freely, and then moving into a single final combat encounter at the end. And that formula worked really well for Andy's two adventures. It provided some really good pacing with a good climax at the end. That being said, it's not a formula that I would follow every time because it adds a level of predictability where people don't have to worry about combat so much until they're getting towards the end of the adventure. Another difference between the adventures that Andy authored versus the one that I did is that I used a closed cast while developing the adventure. Like I developed the player characters myself, with a lot of specifics included in there, but letting the players sort of role play it however they wanted to. And Andy included an open cast where characters were encouraged to just bring their own character regardless of what it was. And even during the first session, encouraging us to not even discuss what characters we were bringing beforehand, so that we could just surprise each other entirely with our party composition moving into the first session. I found that my closed cast allowed me to tell a really tightly focused story that I had in my head, but didn't allow for as much player freedom. Where the open cast allowed me to sort of, as a player, enjoy this world, but through the lens of a character of my own creation. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I think the open cast is a little bit easier to apply if you're not trying to tell a very specific story. And now I just want to get to the part of the vlog here where I talk about the things to come. We're of course going to continue our weekly games. Those are streamed live on Twitch at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday mornings, and that's at twitch.tv/drfeelgood_TV. The highlight reels I'm going to continue to develop as time permits. I've sort of fallen behind on them given the holiday season. There wasn't that many great moments that I could roll into a highlight reel during our third game session. And at the same time, I was writing that one shot for the next week, so I really didn't have time to do it. I'm finding that there's not always going to be enough highlights to create a full highlight reel after every game session, so I might think about rolling several of them into one highlight reel. And I think I'm really going to take the time to compose a highlight reel for our 3 one-shots, because there was a lot of fun stuff that happened during that time. The only problem with that is I have approximately 11 hours of footage that I need to work through to create that highlight reel. I'm going to keep on authoring things as we continue on. I had great fun with the one shot that I wrote already, and I already have an idea in mind for another one that's going to be kind of Indiana Jones / Tomb Raider / Uncharted style of like a dungeon crawl through like a classical sort of like tomb raiding environment. I'm having a lot of fun weaving micro level stuff into the world that we're already playing in. Like, I like the fact that I created the El Terrell Savings Caper into a city where the characters in our main campaign are going to be visiting shortly. Like, and I'm going to like throw in a little homage to that adventure as the characters arrive into the city. And I'm excited to continue doing that in the future with some other stuff. Way down the line, I actually have a premise for a completely homebrewed campaign in mind. the campaign would take place in a completely custom world. It wouldn't be Forgotten Realms. It wouldn't be anything that's already previously published. It would be something just off the top of my dome that I'm creating. I'm starting to author it in my spare time. I actually don't have anything on like paper yet to actually say that I've started writing. I just have ideas, and it's something that I might be interested in running after we complete the Tyranny of Dragons campaign. So we're gonna do Horde of the Dragon Queen, then we're gonna do Rise of Tiamat, and if it's in a condition where it's actually ready to be run after that, that might be our next thing. Otherwise, we might go on to just doing a different pre-published campaign. Future of this vlog. I plan to revisit this vlog once every couple months as a way of continuously reassessing myself and tracking myself. Like I'm gonna sit down in a couple months, watch this vlog that I'm making right now, and then go back and talk about how I think things have developed since then. And it's going to be the same thing that I'm doing here again. We're going to talk about how the campaign's going, how I see myself growing, and what plans I have for the future. And that's all I have for now. Thanks for joining me behind the screen.